Welcome everyone to the People Solve Problems podcast. This is your host Jamie Flinchbaugh, and today we have a special guest, Eric Harding. Eric, how you doing?
Doing great, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very glad to have you. A little introduction for Eric. He's the Vice President of HR Operations and Systems at Republic Services. 20 years leading transformation across HR, manufacturing, product development. So a lot of breadth in a lot of different environments. Helps organizations solve complex problems by blending his operational excellence, data, lean thinking, deliver real results. And so lots of breadth, lots of depth that we'll all get to benefit from today. Um,
Great.
so let's just start. Lean thinking is a part of that, but again, you've worked in a lot of different environments and companies, some of which probably have their own sort of own programs and tool sets, and some you've been part of introducing. So how do you explore, experiment with, trial, integrate different problem-solving techniques?
Great question. It's interesting, and it's always a different journey depending upon the organization. There's as you mentioned, there's organizations that are pretty ingrained that I've joined that were Six Sigma organizations that were very much about how many belts can we get.
Yeah, right.
And I've joined organizations that had really no foundation or no methodology for problem solving. And I find that that's probably more really the case than in most situations, that it's pretty most most organizations are pretty immature when it comes to this. As far as my background with problem solving, I think my foundations and my thinking starts back in, we joke about eighth grade science class in scientific method, right? There's
Right.
some great foundations there for just basic problem solving. And then back in, aging myself here, back in the early 90s when I joined Intel, seven-step problem solving was really foundational, and I really got behind that and actually started teaching the course, because I find for myself the best way to learn something is to teach it myself. And so teaching others really helps. And just some basic things. Brainstorming was really big in those days. A lot of brainstorming was happening, and using that for ideation and problem solving. And then as time progressed, as you mentioned, a lot of lean thinking and DMAIC was also, incorporated especially as I joined those organizations that had a Six Sigma background. One of my problem solving jokes is, if you can figure out how to put it into a quadrant, you can write a book about it and you'll have a problem solving methodology, right? You just got to have that quadrant. So but there's, for me, the foundational and how I integrate this into a new culture, into a new organization is the elements that you see in all of these is very foundational. And whether you want to stick to, a certain named problem solving technique, to me, it's about being systematic. It's about having a methodology that you use to solve problems. And one thing that I found, if you look at all those things that I just mentioned, one is defining the problem.
Yep.
I think most organizations are horrible at this. And so, what problem are you trying to solve, and what does good look like when you get done solving the problem? Those, if you just ask those fundamental common sense questions, if you will, that will take most people's and most organizations' problem solving to a next level.
Yep. No, I love that. And going back to scientific method, right? It's kind of the roots of all of it. And
Yeah.
the guy we consider sort of the father of at least articulating that, John Dewey, he's also the guy that said famously, if a problem well defined is a problem half solved, to your point around the importance of defining the problem statement. Um, and so I like that sort of first principles of problem solving mentality. Is it's the particular approach may not matter, but having a methodology, being systematic, incorporating the scientific method, it matters quite a bit. Um,
Absolutely.
so let me talk about you have a lot of these different environments. From as you mentioned, Intel, where you have really smart people working on very technical things. HR environments in manufacturing and product development. When you go from environment to environment, whether these things, and as you mentioned, a lot of these places, there is no foundation already put in place. How do you adjust your coaching style and approach to meet the needs of where the organization is or where the individual is?
Yeah, an interesting one, and a lot of good lessons learned along the way. I'll start back with when you and I first met many years ago, when I was a lean manager for multiple factories. This came as a clear learning to me, and understanding that there are different cultures, for different, each organization has its own culture. And I would actually go try something in one manufacturing site, literally walk across the parking lot, try the same thing, and had it worked greatly in the first place, I'd walk across the parking lot and try, and it would fail miserably. So that was my first, insight into culture matters.
Yeah.
Where is this organization specifically, in its journey? Where is it as far as the products that it's delivering?
Mhm.
What products is it delivering? What are the key challenges for the organization, in helping them solve and understand what the right problems to solve are, and pulling the right tool out of the tool belt, if you will, from that standpoint. And I think when you look at it at its foundations, and again, some of that foundational training for me that I lean on is kind of the situational leadership approach. If you look at it from the organizational level, where is that organization in its overall development? Where is it in its culture? And having someone that you're coaching specifically, where are they in their knowledge of this? Do they have any foundation in problem solving, or are they, problem solving is, PLC, and we just jump in and we start, fixing problems, if you will,
Right.
right?
I love that. The situation matters, situational leadership, the culture matters, and you just can't copy and paste that. You can copy and paste a tool, but the tool doesn't make the team and doesn't make the problem solving itself. And as you said, all it took was a parking lot apart from two buildings.
Exactly.
It wasn't like you were headed across to Singapore or something. It
Yep.
was across the parking lot in the same campus. Um, so as part of that culture, I want to talk about learning and problem solving. Um, and within that, how do you ensure that learning is a part of problem solving? And I want to kind of extend that to what are the impediments to that as you face different situations, and the situational leadership, what are the biggest impediments that you see teams facing from embracing problem solving as a learning approach?
Yeah, again, I think there's a lot to do with the culture of the organization, and what they're open to, when you come in with your methodology. And I found that people get a little nervous when you start labeling things. And to me, I you know detached myself from a specific methodology, and that's why I actually use the word methodology based improvement. Just use a method. I don't, don't care what it is. And that takes a little bit out of, kind of making people nervous that you want to be a Six Sigma organization or Lean Six Sigma organization or whatever it may be. But making sure learning is part of it. I take it all the way back to the interview process. And every interview that I do, I ask the same question. I may ask more technical questions depending upon the position or different things, but I ask this one question. Tell me about your proudest accomplishment in solving a problem and perhaps any tools or techniques that you used. 90% of the time, it's automation that we implemented, and there really was no methodology. It was just an implementation, right?
Mhm.
And so learning for most people is very big. I go back to and actually just trained about 350 people last week on A3. It is so foundational, and it is, to me, the visual representation allows for that learning and that ongoing coaching. And I've learned this through multiple organizations. It's kind of funny. I use this as my, going from 17 years of being a manufacturing guy to going into HR. One of my first HR big, strategy sessions was with one of our shared service centers down in Costa Rica. Had some great people, great thought leaders, involved with me, and we were going to go, look at the pain points of the organization and, have them write an A3 and come back to me with a problem statement. So I sent 10 different teams off to go, observe and come back and with a problem statement for me.
Yeah.
And 90% of those problem statements had the word manual in the problem statement.
Right.
So therefore, the solution obviously was going to be automated. So I have a rule now, and it's my HR rule for A3s, which is you cannot use the word manual in your problem statement. So, it's very basic in, old school, if you will, but to me, it is such a great use and a great basic tool using an A3 for coaching, because, you can see people's thinking of, how they're thinking about the problem. Just a recent example, there's been kind of there's issues that have been going on for years and years, and people, trying to solve it in different ways, and found, in this recent example that, it was always this kind of who does what, roles, responsibilities type of thing, and mapped out the process flow. And as I started and had my first, coaching with the team, and as I started digging in and asking some questions, because I could see their thinking in the A3, I found out that the problem that they were really solving wasn't really a roles and responsibilities problem, because it's like, okay, you have the process flow, who does what, right? What you've got is a process problem, because nobody does it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've been trying to solve this problem, for years, and because they were solving the wrong problem, and they didn't have that kind of coaching to really take them down to what really is the issue here.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I love the process as manual problem statement, right? It's so easy to look at what you don't have and use that to back yourself into a problem statement. That the only solution is have the thing, right?
Yeah.
In this case, automation, right? And it closes doors to asking other questions like, should we even do this process? And is there a faster way? Is there a better way? And if we just automate it, it'll automatically be better, even if we have a bad process. And certainly in an AI world, that same habit is rearing its head again with
Oh, yeah.
everybody wanting to just throw AI at a problem when we don't even understand the process or the problem.
Oh, 100%. I actually, have been on stage at shared services and outsourcing week talking about just this, where I had, there was some of, LinkedIn's highest contributors on AI and talking about that, that philosophy. And I'm like, I go back to just, the simple approach is that, you can't implement AI if you haven't already just looked at your processes, make sure they're structured, standardized, right? To begin with, if you don't have standardized and streamlined processes, you know, AI is not going to be a great solution for you.
Yeah.
You have to start there. And most organizations, as I mentioned, that in my experience are not there and have a
Right.
lot of improvement, excuse me, a lot of improvement work that can be done by doing that.
Yeah. Let me talk about the problem landscape. So before you choose a problem statement, you kind of have to decide to work on the problem. There's a plethora of problems to choose from. Going back to your Intel days, sometimes it was more obvious, equipment's down or it's producing, bad product and it's kind of calls attention to itself. I'm sure in HR, there's other ways problems call attention to themselves because they become people problems and complaints on behalf of employees that do have to get resolved. And so you end up with this very, I'll say it, noisy problem landscape, and that can be very distracting and hard to sort through. So how do you whether it's your own team or yourself or just helping others, how do you sort through all that noise to get to the right problems to even begin to solve?
Loudest customer wins.
Often does, right?
Yeah, no, well, the reality is a lot of times that's, where most organizations start, but
Right.
it's probably not the best, systematic or methodology based approach.
No.
Um, I find that in working with my team, I'm an industrial engineer in an HR organization, so I'm a little bit of a, square peg in a round hole sometimes, but I've found that the organizations are very open, and I've been in multiple companies now, um, and just developing some meaningful KPIs. And a lot of organizations don't track KPIs. They don't, look at them regularly, or they may have a dashboard, but who does anything with it, right? And so having monthly operating, just foundational stuff, right? Having monthly operating reviews to discuss this, with my extended leadership team, and kind of gets us more into a proactive learning, right? The ideal is to get to where you're telling the customers, here are the key issues, versus them, as you mentioned, and it can be, a very loud landscape and messy landscape, and a lot of people coming to tell us what, where we need to focus. Um, but getting to a point, and it takes time, and sometimes you do have to take care of those loud customers on the side as you're
Sure.
building the infrastructure. But getting to a point to where you've got meaningful KPIs, meaning that, you know just measuring indicators isn't enough. You've got to have something that that you're measuring, and if it's out of control, I learned this from my manufacturing days, right? Statistical process control, right? Having control limits, right? Having goals, having targets, whatever it may be, having that, and then doing something about it if it's not. What's your action plan if you're not meeting, the target, and having true actionable items. And then you kind of get into the next phase of this, which is a lot of people will, see these things, see indicators, and say, you know, we've got the turnover problem.
Hmm.
Well, you don't have a turnover problem. You've got hundreds of little problems that are leading to turnover, right? And
Right.
so getting the team to, again, that actionable, having that turnover KPI is a great thing, but having actions to take associated with, you know, breaking it down and understanding what are the true issues that are driving that is really the key. And then, you build that confidence with customers as you're doing that, and they become less loud, right? Because it without, and I found this in, previous organization where I was managing background checks, and background checks to the customers, to the organization, could be, people want their people to get started, right?
Right.
And so background checks taking a long time can be problematic. And so what I found was I was getting, calls into the business organizations to get yelled at because my background checks were taking too long. And I didn't have any data to prove them wrong. So I actually hired a data analyst specifically to come in and build me some data so that I can, understand really the problem landscape there.
Mhm.
Built this out, drew some basic, of what is, what is the duration of, each background check, and found that, hey, our 90th percentile is right on target. By the way, the people that you're talking about that take X amount of time, those are, the extremes, but they were controlling the narrative. Without data, I couldn't argue against that. Now I've got data and I can say, yes, that's the extreme and this is what caused that particular one. But 90% of them are within this duration. Yes, we'll work on those outliers, right?
Let me just a quick follow up on KPIs, given their importance. And it's one thing to say go get them. Your story there indicates sometimes you got to do the hard work to build it. Um, what would you tell somebody that they know the best KPI for them is really hard to get, really
Yeah.
hard to build, versus they have some stuff that's measurable. Maybe it's directionally correct, but it's not as perfect. How do you manage that trade-off?
Yeah, there's definitely a trade-off there. And I think it's, some, more recent examples, having a team that's never measured anything, right? And starting somewhere,
Right.
right? See what data you have access to and start somewhere. And then, to me, I use those operation reviews to, question and dig in and coach and look at, and actually ended up having, the part of the group that hadn't done measurements before actually have, took their leadership and they spent time with me to say, what makes a good indicator?
Yeah.
And really getting into, what are we trying to do with them? Right? Are we trying to explain, because a lot of the indicators are explain what the group does by showing volumes, by showing those types of things? Not real actionable, but maybe a good place to start, just so the organization knows what you're doing.
Yep.
And then you need to get into things that are there for you to help solve problems and to make your life better, and in better quality, or more efficiency, that type of thing. So it's kind of an evolution, and just being patient with that evolution, because yeah, there's most organizations have a lot of access to a lot of data. It's just figuring out what's the right data to be looking at, and then developing, you know, a more simplistic way of pulling that data. So it's not, we're spending all of our time preparing for operations reviews instead of doing our real work, right?
Yeah.
Make that more efficient over time.
Great. Well, we covered a lot of ground, Eric. I appreciate you sharing your experiences and your stories, your perspective. I think our audience gains a lot from that. And so I wish you and the Republic Services all the best.
Thanks so much, Jamie. I appreciate it.